This is Health Sciences Update, a look at the health sciences programs at Washington State University, Spokane. I'm Doug Nadvornik. We're going to talk about how we as parents talk to our infants and young children. Recently, Mark VanDam postulated that moms and dads have different styles in communicating with their young children. And we're going to talk about that. Mark VanDam is with us right here. Welcome to the program here, Mark. So tell us a little bit about what you were looking to find when you did this study.
Well, we were in a lab meeting a few years ago, and we were sort of joking that there's this term motherese that people know, and when mothers talk to their children, they use a high-pitched voice and they exaggerate certain words and phrases and so on. And we were joking that there is no equivalent for fatherese, and thought that wasn't a very PC thing. So then we got serious and thought, my goodness, well, has anyone ever looked at whether there's fatherese versus motherese? And we discovered that people have not paid close attention to fatherese. So fast forward a couple of years later, and we have collected a bit of data looking at how families interact with one another and how mothers and fathers talk with their children, and in particular how parents of children with hearing loss talk to their children. So, and we looked at dads' use of this motherese, and we found that dads use a different kind of speech when they talk to their young children.
So I'm curious as to how did you set this up, and how did you record the data?
Good question. We used a device called the Lena, which is a small recorder that's worn on the chest of the children, and they wear a special shirt, and the recorder is a standalone device that takes an audio recording from the child's auditory perspective. So we turn it on in the morning, and the child wears the device all day long, and then we send the device or collect the device back to the lab and offload the audio from the whole day, and then use the power of modern computers and automatic speech recognition to determine who's talking and when. And then we're able to do computer analysis on the audio file to look at how often moms are talking and how often dads are talking, and what kind of speech production characteristics those mothers and fathers and children have, and even how often the TV's on in the environment and those kind of things.
So I'm curious, was it easy to put motherese in a particular category and fatherese into a particular category?
Well, we have to use a proxy for that, and what we use is when mothers are engaged in conversations in which the child is also engaged in the same conversation. So if a mother says something and the child talks within some time frame, within a couple of less than a second typically, then we call that a conversation in which the mother and the child are engaged, and the same for the dads. There are other times where the child is wearing the recorder but the child is not engaged in the conversation, and those are conversations within earshot of the child because the child's wearing the device, but the child is not engaged, and we assume that those are interactions between the mother and the father, so where parents are talking to each other rather than talking to the child. So that's how we distinguish the child-directed or the infant-directed from the adult-directed speech.
So what was your hypothesis going in? I mean, for me as a dad, this seems pretty intuitive, but what were you thinking going in?
Well, the beauty of science is we have the ability to ask the question and have the possibility that either dads behave like mothers behave, and there's no difference between moms and dads, or that dads do nothing and moms do something, or that dads do the sort of opposite that moms do. So we didn't come in with a specific hypothesis, although like you, I am interested in this in part because I'm a father too, and I have my own children, and I watch dads interact and watch moms interact. So we wanted to put some evidence, some real quantitative evidence on this to see if moms and dads behave the same way. So we were sort of expecting that dads would do similar things to what moms would do, because there's a real sense, and people have hypothesized or speculated, that moms use this infant-directed speech in order to gain the children's attention and in order to teach the children language and to get those children to tune in to the mothers. So if it's good for the goose, then maybe it's good for the gander. And if mothers are doing it, then dads are probably doing it too, we thought. And when we discovered that dads are not doing that, and just to be clear, in this particular case, we're looking only at the pitch of the parents. So in this particular domain, when dads are not doing it, we needed to sort of speculate or wonder why that's the case. So it turns out that a number of researchers have looked at this and have wondered about differences between moms and dads. And there's something called the bridge hypothesis. And in this case, the idea is that mothers provide a link or a bridge to a certain kind of interaction, a certain kind of social interaction. And dads provide a link to another kind of interaction. So in a traditional setting, and in a traditional family, which is the kind of recordings that we did, dads typically go out into the world a little more, and moms tend to stay home more. So moms provide an environment or provide a link to that home environment that's a little more explicit, and dads provide a link to some of the things that go on in the world. So dads give practice to a different kind of speech and a different kind of social interaction than the moms provide. So we have a story for why dads might do this or not. Now, we don't have the ability to test that theory explicitly, but at least the facts fit with a hypothesis there.
Now, you presented this at a big conference in Pittsburgh, and you've gotten a heck of a lot of attention from this. Tell me what you've obviously talked to a lot of reporters along the way. Tell me about some of the questions you're getting regarding this.
Well, I think the biggest question is the same question that we have and a question you were asking earlier, and that is, well, why do parents do this? And given that there's the differences that we found, why would there be a difference between moms and dads? If it's good for one, why wouldn't it be good for the others? So unfortunately, we're not really prepared to ask that question because we didn't know that we would find this result. So it's not part of the design. Another question that people are asking, or another question that we've designed into it, is in my lab, is to wonder if there are any effects when there are deficits by the children themselves. So I mentioned this earlier, that we looked at families with a child with hearing loss. So we know, and I think most people have had the experience, when a talker encounters an interlocutor or another person who has a perceived deficit. So if I think that you have a hearing loss, or if I think that you are maybe a non-native speaker of English, I might do things with how I present my speech to you.
You'd speak a little louder, a little slower.
A little louder, a little slower, maybe with some exaggerated intonation. And that sounds a lot like how people describe motherese. So motherese might be one of these specific cases in which the mothers in particular are reacting to a perceived deficit or a perceived lessened capacity of the child to interact with adult-like speech. So what if we add another feature into the mix, namely that the child, him or herself, has hearing loss? Do parents of hearing impaired children interact with their children any differently? And we found a very happy result in that case, and one that we did expect and one that we did predict, and that is that moms and dads of hearing impaired children don't seem to treat their children any differently than moms and dads of typically developing children. So we find that those mothers and fathers tend to treat their children just as though they're just like they do their typically developing children. So that's a nice, what we like to call a happy non-result.
So is there a next step with this particular research?
Well, yeah, the first step, and the one that we presented, was a bit of a pilot study, and we had this exciting result that dads and moms were different. So the next step is to increase the number of observations and increase the power of the statistics that we can use. So the first step, this one that we presented, we used 11 families, and we have about another 100 or so families who in the database, and we're in the process of scaling that up to examine what happens in a larger sample of families. And that'll give us the ability to look at some other variables too, whether this might be linked to socioeconomic status. So we know, for example, that certain families who are a lower socioeconomic status have a different language environment from higher socioeconomic status families. We're interested in maybe looking at whether parents or families that have more children in them might have a different acoustic or language environment for these children. So we're able to look at some other variables and actually answer the question a little different. different way.
So you did 11 families around the country. Were they all in Spokane? Were they all around the country?
These particular 11 families were from 5 different states, actually. And I can't cite them off the top of my head, but they're from all over the country.
So you got a pretty good range. It's not just
That's
one
right.
particular locale then.
That's right. But we don't think that this depends necessarily on the family's dialect or other specific features that were unique to these families. These particular families that we reported on had all the children were almost exactly 2.5 years old, and the families were a nuclear family with mom and dad and child living under the same roof. So we tried. That's another reason the initial go at this was a bit of a pilot. We wanted to keep some of that variability stable so that we didn't have unusual factors that might influence the data, as you have pointed out, if they're from a different region or
Ethnic groups.
Exactly. So those kind of things we tried to control in the design of the experiment itself. But the next step is to take some of those controls off and actually explicitly examine some of those features like ethnicity and family income and those kind of factors.
Now you have what's called the speech and language lab here on the campus,
Right.
and as an old radio guy, I'm always interested because you've got radio equipment that I remember from seeing radio stations. What do you do within that lab?
Well, the lab is the center for my research program, and my students and I and collaborators spend time in the lab, and we have a number of resources in there. The lab is outfitted with a sound recording booth that is about 8 feet by 8 feet by 8 feet, and it's one of these rooms that audiologists and radio people and TV people use, and we can have high control of the environment, so there are no outside noises that get in, and we have video cameras and audio equipment that can both present those signals to participants in our experiments and collect those from those participants. And we have a number of workstations in the lab itself where students are busily working away, and very importantly, we have a server where we keep primarily the data, and this equipment is generally managed by me, but we always have a beehive of activity, particularly when classes are in session. Students are frequently in the lab spending time doing data analysis and data collection and those kinds of things.
So what role did students play in this particular?
In this particular project, students were primarily engaged in collecting the data. So the students interacted with families, and they would explain how the device worked and deliver the device to the families and show how to wear the recorder on the children, and then bring the data back into the lab and organize the data. Some of the students helped with some of the statistical analysis and then preparing the data for presentation. And in this particular case, I presented the data at the conference in Pittsburgh, and another student presented the data at a similar subset of the data at a conference in Portland in January. And we're hoping to do another round of presentations at another conference in Denver in the fall.
So it's a great opportunity for them to be involved in this.
Yes, we have students involved in all aspects of this. We have undergraduate students, students from WSU, students from Eastern, from Gonzaga, and they're very interested in the topic, and it's something that can be explained kind of quickly. So the basic hypothesis doesn't depend on a deep scientific knowledge. So it's something that we can grasp pretty straightforwardly, and I think that's another reason the media has picked up on it.
Sure.
So
Thank you, Mark.
yeah.
Mark VanDam is an assistant professor in the Department of Speech and Hearing Sciences. This is Health Sciences Update. I'm Doug Nadvornik.